This is episode 3 of our episode 3 of our corpora and bylaws and admin manual review question and answer panel. The topics that we are hoping to cover this evening are Article 3, officers and directors of the bylaws, and Section 2, membership, and 4, officers of the admin manual. Last Sunday, we spent the majority of the time talking about a membership article in the bylaws. So we're going to sort of do a little catch up and start off talking about Section 2, membership of the admin manual today. If you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to share with us, please type that into the live chat of your YouTube window there. Hars will be monitoring, and I believe Goran as well will both be monitoring that chat channel, so they will bring your questions to us. So, looking at the admin manual, Section 2 is membership. There are a couple things that we talk about in here. We've added or proposed that we add a class of membership, and that is visitors. I think we touched on this a little bit last weekend. Did anybody have any additional comments they wanted to add about that, or had they heard any additional questions in that area?
No, we covered it pretty good last time.
Okay, and I think that's, it's a good move for us to have that designation. The requirements for those classes of membership are defined in our bylaws because that's a legal consideration of how we define our membership. So that's mostly covered in the bylaws as opposed to the admin manual. So in addition to the bylaw the requirements that are listed in the bylaws that we talked about last weekend, there are 2 requirements as well. So the one is that you pay semi-annual membership dues in the amount of $10. And there's a change here that's being proposed that doesn't necessarily coincide with how most parks are doing it now, and that is that dues would be paid the first week of January and July. Is there anybody who wanted to touch on that?
Nope.
Rage, I can't hear.
Oh no. Okay. But I think it's good that we're going to be able to do that, because paying in January and July, that's the 6-month period, it's easier to keep track of for our prime ministers as well as the rest of Northreach to be able to keep track of their dues during that time, instead of somebody randomly paying on, say, August 20th, and then somebody having to keep track and say, hey, your dues are about to come up, when they have so much other paperwork that they're going to be going through. It'll be easier for our prime ministers as well as our higher ups in Northreach to be able to keep track of these things.
Yeah, Wolfie's exactly right. And one of the other issues that I know I've seen a lot over time is those issues where people will pay dues during crown quals or during that time, and then only to have them expire 2 weeks before the next set of elections, and they don't realize it because they paid their dues 2 weeks before the prior elections. And it's very difficult for everyone to keep track of. I mean, if you have 30 different members, you could literally have 30 different dues expiration dates. So, so having them all expire at once means that we'll have more consistent voting eligible members and less headache for our administrative officers, because they have other stuff that they should be worrying about.
To clarify, would we be able to pay our dues one on top of the other, so they would expire after the reign after that one, or would we not be able to do that?
There's nothing in the draft we have right now that would prevent that. So that would totally be up to the administrative officers, the prime minister team, to figure out if they wanted to do it that way or not. But the bylaws wouldn't prevent it.
Okay.
So if you wanted to pay like 2 years right there, you could actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically you could. And as long as we're keeping track of it really good, ideally using Square or something like that to create an electronic receipt, that would totally be feasible and work. One of the things that has been brought up, I think I remember seeing it on the forums regarding this specific issue, was whether or not dues would be prorated. If somebody were to, become eligible to be a voting member, i.e. they meet the 6 months of playing requirement, say, in, I don't know, December. And so they paid their dues, and then they have to pay them again in January because all the dues expire in January, whether or not we would do a proration. And the bylaws don't really specify or allow for that proration, but we've looked at it a couple of times, and there's some drawbacks to trying to do a prorated dues, because what that does is it creates a situation in which your members could just pay dues like the month before elections and only pay 1/6 of the dues, and they would come out and do that, and so that's bad. And realistically, people would only have, if they came into a shortened reign or shortened dues term, it would only happen once, and then they'd be on the same schedule as everybody else. So there won't be like this huge issue where people are constantly paying for less time than they get. I would be worried about having a situation in which our members could regularly show up and pay dues a month before the elections and only pay one fraction of the dues cost in order to vote in that election.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because actually for a long time, this is pretty much exactly how Frozen Coast did it. And it worked really, really well for them. While they were doing this, they had the highest number of dues paid members in Alaska. They didn't have any of the confusion of, am my dues paid? When do my dues expire? It was very clear, and it was a really good system. It wasn't meant with what our current corpora supports. So they resolved that. But sort of as a consequence of that, they have now that confusion amongst their members of, when do my dues expire? Am I dues paid? Am I eligible to vote in these things? And their dues paid numbers have gone down. They have fewer people. And it was pretty much in line with when they made the change and how they handled dues. Their dues paid membership started to decline. So I think we have actually a really great case, a use case where we've seen it. It's sort of been piloted, and it worked really, really well for them. And from what I understand, it was a very positive experience for them as a park. So I think it does a lot of good things for us. So that's the first additional qualification, is the sort of changing of how we potentially handle dues. The next requirement that's added in the admin manual, but is not included in the bylaws, is attend at least 12 regular meetings within the last 180 days for the region to which they are assigned.
I have Para's in the chat now.
Oh, cool. Hi, Para. I don't think that I heard any or saw any questions or concerns or comments on that. Had anybody received any feedback on that requirement?
I had a couple people just ask why we were doing that, because essentially we're making it harder for people to vote in all things. But what this does is it takes away having like 3 different tiers of voting members. It's everybody. You can either vote or you can't. There's no situational voting. So right now, somebody who has been in AmGuard for at least 6 months but hasn't actually played in 5 could show up on the day of an all thing, pay their dues, and vote, and have no idea what they're voting on. But they could not vote in an election because they hadn't been there for 12 days in the last 6 months. So we kind of create this weird duality where you can vote on really important things, because the all thing has the power to do anything, but you couldn't vote on an officer. So it was sort of weird. So we just decided to combine it all so that it made it very, very easy for our prime ministers to track who was able to vote and who was not. And so rather than relaxing all of the voting requirements, we just made everything the same as we do for officers.
Yeah, when we consider that your all thing is who approves your budget, who approves, like, I mean, anything in your park, the all thing has the power to make the decision. And we say it's okay if you haven't been here for the last 5 months, you have no idea what's going on, you can show up and cast your vote to decide what's happening in the park. So there was another sort of the next section has to do with members under the age of 14. And the proposal in this section is that they're prohibited from participating in combat activities unless they're approved by a 2/3 vote of the board of directors. Whereas right now they are approved to participate in that on a park by park basis, where the local monarch says they assume the liability and the responsibility for this underage person participating. However, right now, your local monarch isn't legally liable for anything that happens. The board is. So they take on that personal responsibility, but the responsibility for the organization is actually carried by the board because they're our legal body of liability.
And we're streamlining the board so it actually becomes the Council of Crowns. So when and if this admin and the bylaws are passed, it'll be the Council of Crowns who actually decides if these people are okay to play in the parks. And at that point, it's really up to the monarch of your local park to present a case to the rest of the Council of Crowns. If this young person is actually able to control themselves adequately on the field to play with everybody else. And that's what that's going to boil down to.
Exactly.
Yep. And so it avoids some things where, you know, if there's a member who is their local monarch has approved them to play in Icefire Bay, and then they travel for an event, for a weekend, whatever, and they go to Astral Winds, then the Astral Winds monarch isn't in this weird position where they're like, well, I don't know you. I have no idea what your ability is on the field. I've never talked to you or about this situation, and now I'm kind of blindsided because you're here and I don't know if you should be playing or not. Whereas if we've discussed it statewide and all of the monarchs are aware of the situation, it just adds uniformity and consistency and makes it so much easier for those underage players who have earned approval to fully participate in the activity instead of it being in this weird sort of limbo state.
If I could chime in something there, one question that I had from someone at my park was how they suggested that it should also require like a reference letter essentially from the champion of the local park the 14-year-olds in, which I actually absolutely agree with, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are supposed to be saying, like, okay, this person's safe, this person's not, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, so the question is it a requirement that that letter be presented, or would that letter just be helpful to getting that person approved? I don't know that necessarily legislating it to that point is necessary. I think we just need to delineate whose approval is required. And like, if I'm a monarch and it's a park with a member that I have no real experience with, I'm just going to ask, explain to me why this person should be allowed on the field early. And it might be that the champion wrote an awesome letter about how he feels that person will be safe on the field. It also might be a letter from, I don't know, the kid's karate instructor who says, you know what, he's a black belt and he's 13 years old and he kicks a lot of butt, and I think that he would be safe in any contact sport. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can be used to make the case, and I don't know that we want to spell all those out in the bylaws.
Well, I think the concern would be that the principality says, like, yeah, we think this kid is legit, and the local champion says, no, I disagree. I do not think that person should be playing on the field here. Like what happens in that case?
Will we have to decide who has more authority to represent the organization, a single champion or all of the executive officers?
I think it's still within the purview of the person who is in charge of that field on that day to say this is unsafe, and I'm making this call that today this is not it's not safe. We're not going to do this. I mean, I don't think that in any of the areas we are removing that authority from the people who are in charge of our fields.
Well, and you also got to remember too that that local champion's monarch is the one that presented it in the first place. So if there's a disagreement between the monarch and his champion, then that may be something they need to sort out separately. And I'm not really sure how to try to legislate something that details specifically how we would handle a disagreement between a local monarch and a local champion on this issue.
Well, I'm not sure what he's suggesting.
Really, they should talk to the prime minister about it. Legitimately, it's maybe they should act as an intermediary between the two to figure out the differences, so that then they can present it to the board later on after they've worked out their differences. Because you should be presenting an argument to the board for or against this person if you two can't get on the same page about it.
But I think what I was hearing was that if we move forward with this and the monarchs, the board of directors, has said, yep, this person's thumbs up, and then they go to not their normal home park, and the champion of that home park is like, whoa, you're gonna die, kid, and I am not going to allow that to happen on my watch. I think that's the question there is.
Oh, no. Yeah. At that point, if a member was approved according to the draft that we have here, they would be treated like any other member, and any member that's unsafe on the field should be pulled by the Reaver champion.
Right, exactly.
So this is something that with the Council of Crowns that it's going to have to be, hey, special consideration. This person weighs, 120 pounds soaking wet. They're going to go over to, Astro Winds and play with some of the heavy hitters up there. Do they feel safe doing this?
Well, and really all the Council of Crowns is saying, yes, we think this person should be treated like any 14-year-old member. And then at that point, they would be treated like any 14-year-old member, because there's plenty of 120-pound 14-year-olds. But if their behavior on the field is unsafe, then the champion absolutely should pull them off, just like they would any member, whether they were 14 or 45.
Yeah.
But is that what you were saying, Josh?
Well, I think the initial question, I think both are super important points. And I think the response, that is great. The initial question that I had posed to me was, whether we thought there was value in having there maybe at the very least be a cursory, from the champion, yep, I agree with this, their opinion should be counted, from that, wherever that, the home region of that.
Sort of a reference letter from the champion, as it were.
Well, that was the initial discussion. I don't know that that's necessarily necessary. I don't know if they need to write a 500-word essay on why they think this kid should be allowed to play, but maybe just yep, and the champion's on board too is potentially important. That's their job.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good best practice. I'm personally of the opinion that I don't want to over-legislate how the council makes its decisions, because they're the ones legally responsible for those decisions. So I would recommend that any council check in with the champion first, but I don't want to necessarily say that if you don't check in with the champion, you can't move forward with making this decision. That's on them. They're the ones that are legally responsible for it.
Yeah, I think that, as the head of the Council of Crowns, that's something that I would personally ask for. And I think it would be fair to establish some sort of best practices that aren't necessarily legislated, but are clearly defined best practices. So if somebody says, how do I go about getting this exemption? Okay, well, this is what we've done in the past, and this is how that's moved forward. But still allowing each individual council, as they're seated, to move forward in the way that they feel best mitigates the liability and risk to the organization. Which I would strongly encourage to include feedback from the local champion who actually knows if this person is safe or not. So
Yeah.
overall, I think I mostly heard, positive comments regarding that. So I think that idea of having the Council of Crowns do that approval or / board of directors is supported. And so that was good because I think it would be a really good addition for us. So the next thing that we had was membership may be suspended or terminated as per Article 2, Section 8 of the bylaws. And I think that this was one of the areas where we had a referencing issue because there isn't an Article 2, Section 8 of the bylaws.
No, it's Section 6. It was just a renumbering.
Yes. So
Yeah, that was the one we had problems with.
yes, exactly. And that was a really great catch because we went through so much renumbering and reorganization that this is one of them, got lost in the shuffle. So what that should read is Article 2, Section 6 of the bylaws. Additionally, it's saying an individual's membership is considered voluntarily terminated upon claiming membership with any other organization outside blah, 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 blah. So what that basically means is that if you move away and you become a member of a different chapter of Amtgard, you are no longer a member of Northreach. So you can't be a member in two groups. Does anybody have any questions or had heard any comments or feedback about that? Aside from the referencing issue.
Well, sounds good.
Cool. So the next one was regarding membership terminations. So this one references Appendix 2, which I believe is the Amtgard Code of Conduct. The other thing that this adds is the statement, or for any reason deemed appropriate by the board of directors. And there's some referencing in there, which I believe, again, references the wrong section.
Yeah, no, that did reference the wrong section. I think that's another one of the sections that didn't exist that was lost in the shuffle.
Yes, so that also references Article 2, Section 6 of the bylaws, which is dealing with termination. Is there anybody who wanted to chat about that or had anything, questions or feedback or comments from members or just for themselves?
No, I think we talked about it a little bit in one of the previous meetings.
Okay, well, if anybody has any additional questions about that, use that YouTube instant chat. Let's see. So we also touched on this a little bit. The next section is members being assigned to specific regions based on their address. And I know we talked about that last weekend, where you are sort of by default assigned to a specific region just based on your address, but all it takes to change that is contact with the Principality Prime Minister to say, hey, I know I live in Eagle River, which is technically closer to Loop and Moon, but I work every Saturday and I would like to go to Ravenstone. And it's just for records keeping. So, have people in the right places. Was there anybody who had additional comments or questions or feedback on that?
Yeah, I want to point out that section A26 there's no reference to the Prime Minister having to approve that request. So there were some people that felt like, well, what if they don't let me? There's no let me. It says that you may change by submitting a request to the Prime Minister. Once you've done that, it will be changed. It's a preferential thing. The whole point of this assignment thing is so that we could present legal documentation of who was allowed to vote in what all things or elections or whatever, in case we ever needed to do that.
It's kind of what we're already doing now, because most people, I know that I used to live in Loop and Moon. I now live in Eagle River, and I'm between the two parks, and it's easier for me to get out to Ravenstone, obviously. So I changed my membership out to Ravenstone because that was just easier for me to do there. It's kind of like you live in this school district, but you want to go to school in this district. You get a zone exemption. And you go, hey, can I come hang out with you guys? And we go, okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep. So that was a good point of clarification that there's not actually like an approval necessary. You put the request, it happens. Nobody is blocking that from happening. We just want to track it to know. Because like right now, there's some other issues when you transfer, there's no way to tell when your membership transferred from one park to another, that is not tracked in the org. So when it comes down to determining voting eligibility, it gets really difficult. You have to just know when they actually transferred their credits as opposed to when they just started showing up to a different park. So this helps with that. So the next thing was A 2.7, which basically states that if you have been banned in another kingdom, we're not going to accept you as a member.
Nope.
And also says that the Council of Crowns can review that situation and, choose to accept the application. So, if you had a situation where somebody didn't like somebody and so they kicked them out, but for no real reason or good cause, that Council of Crowns could look at that and say, well, it doesn't.
That seems a little hinky. Let's look that through.
Sure. It just gives them the ability to research it and still make a determination on behalf of the organization if they chose to. But it also lets people know, like, hey, if you've been banned, pretty good chance we don't want you.
So I don't think I had heard any comment on that one at all. It seemed pretty
Cut and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that takes us through membership in the admin manual. It's not even 8:30, so we are moving right along. And I think covering all of the questions and feedback that came up. So this is awesome. I have to look at my agenda. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to pop back to the bylaws and look at Article 3, which is officers and directors, which is sort of lengthy, so we may not get back to the admin manual tonight. Goran, do you want to give us is there like a 20-foot overview of the major changes in this area?
Sort of, yeah. I can kind of go through this. So the bylaws need to say who's legally in charge of the organization and what are their responsibilities. So the way we broke it down is in our current corpora, the prince or princess is automatically the president of the board, which essentially makes them the CEO of the organization. We kept that, no reason to change it. So so we put in there that the corporation shall be served by a chief executive officer. We put down how they're elected, etc., and that person is the prince or princess, according to the admin manual. Then each region, or we call them regions, but they're synonymous with chapters now, they get their own monarch, and that person is referred to as a regional executive officer. So since they're part of the board, they get to be an executive, they get to be somebody who makes decisions, which is what they are right now, but then they also get to be a director, which means that they're legally responsible for those decisions, because now they're part of the board. We made the corporation have an administrative officer, which is what our prime minister is now, and detailed when that person is elected, and said that this person's responsible for keeping track of our money, our property, and our membership records. That's their board of directors' job. And then we put down that the administrative officer gets administrative assistants, who are local PMs, who are their job is to help the Northreach Prime Minister do their job at the local level. The reason that they're referred to as assistants is because they're not actually directors or executives. So they don't have any legal responsibilities outside of any contracts or whatever that we would have them sign based on these bylaws. So whatever they do legally, the Northreach Prime Minister would be responsible for. They would be the director that oversees that, and that's where the buck would stop if the law ever got involved. So that's detailed in sections 3.11, 2, 3, and 4. We wrote down they have to be 18 years old. That's normal. You're not allowed to hold more than one office simultaneously, so you can't be prime minister and monarch at the same time. We wrote down that, let's see, what else we got in here that sort of sums it up. We allowed the board of directors to establish additional duties for the directors and officers. So if something comes up that needs to be done, they have, by these bylaws, the power to assign that to somebody. They have the ability to set for themselves additional requirements for attendance, eligibility to run, and removal from office. That's all detailed in the admin manual. And they have the ability to create and set up processes for selection for any other positions, not necessarily officers, in order to get things done. So that's where all of your champions and regents and things like that are all spelled out in the admin manual. But theoretically, the board could come up with something new if they needed to for a specific task. So they could come up with the Principality Guildmaster of Jesters if there was some business reason to create that. The bylaw gives them the authorities to do that. So, and this is all stuff that is incredibly typical in any other board of directors. It just gives them the power to do this on behalf of the organization. It talks about how they can be impeached or removed from office. That's identical to where it is now. You get a petition of 20% of the voting members, and then the membership votes 2/3, and they kick them out. We put down there that an officer is allowed to voluntarily resign their office. That is important to spell out. But we also put in a section there, 3.1.12, that says if a person is disabled, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to perform their duties, they may be removed from office by a vote of the board. So if we have a monarch, let's say if I'm local monarch of Lupin Moon and I'm in a car wreck and I get into a coma, the board can say, okay, given these circumstances, poor Goran cannot fulfill the duties, so we're gonna have to remove him and use the process for selecting a replacement. That allows the board to review the situation and say, yeah, this person is actually disabled and can't do the job, rather than saying they're automatically.
There was some minor issues with the word of disabilities in that, because if someone is disabled, but they are not disabled in the fact that they can't do their duties, but somebody on the board decides they don't like them or something happens, and then this comes up in an actual board meeting, to have them removed because someone decides they don't like them and they find out about their personal life, which is between them and their doctors. They were worried about the actual term disabilities being used because it is a very loose term.
Sure. Well, and so yes, if you could get half of the board to not like this person enough to say we're going to vote you out because you're handicapped, they could do that. It would just open them up to a huge lawsuit because that's not a problem. I mean, really, there's in this particular situation, the term disability is not wheelchair logo disability. It's inability to do your job, essentially. So whether that be a physical disability, a mental disability, whether whatever, the board has to sit down and say, is this person reasonably able to do the job that they were elected to? And if the answer is no, then they would vote to have them removed. I like to think that the people that we're going to vote into these positions will be reasonable enough to not flaunt the Americans with Disabilities Act and get us in a lot of trouble. But I mean, if we have a board that's stupid enough to do that, there's no bylaws in the world we can write that'll stop them.
Okay.
So this is not designed to basically let somebody take advantage of somebody's disability. This wording was common in at least 3 other national NPOs that I looked at when we put this together. So it's not an uncommon turn of phrase, and it's up to our board to not put us in lawsuit territory with pretty much everything that they do. So if somebody was disabled, whether that be an obvious or not obvious disability, there wouldn't be any issues, honestly.
It takes an idiot to raise a village, and it takes a board of idiots to raise the whole principality.
And then lastly, it talks about it gives the board the ability to create a process to create pro tem officers should a position be vacated, and requires that it be detailed in the admin manual. And when you go through there, you'll find that it's pretty much the same as it is now.
And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get to the section of the admin manual that deals with this, so that we can have it all contained in one discussion. That's my goal.
So that's section 1. Do you want me to kind of review section 2?
Sure, that'd be great. Unless there are any additional comments or feedback or questions that people have regarding section 1.
I haven't seen any. Just a comment from Pyro saying that it's awesome that we have good rules for banning people because they have problems with whatever kingdom he's in.
Pyro, come back. We miss you. That's not relevant, but
So section 2 just talks about what the board's supposed to do and who's supposed to do it. So for those of you following along at home, section 321 says that the board's responsible and has the power to conduct, manage, and control the affairs of the corporation, and to make such rules and regulations, therefore, that don't violate the law or the bylaws, and that they deem are in the best interest of the organization. Basically, it gives them the power to make decisions. It allows them to designate any place for the holding of a membership meeting, or board of directors meeting, or change of the office of the organization, which is just a legal address that we have to have on file with the state. And it allows them to borrow money or incur indebtedness for the purpose of the corporation, and to basically make promissory notes, to act financially. That's a normal description.
That's kind of along the same lines that we're doing stuff right now.
Sort of, but well, right now, according to our bylaws, if we wanted to, say, buy property and take out a mortgage on that property, we don't have the authority to do that. Nobody in our organization has the authority to do that. This gives them that authority. So if we wanted to, say, find an awesome piece of land to build castles on, because that's what we want to do, and that piece of land costs $80,000, and we want to put 20 grand down and pay, I don't know, $200 a month for the next 10 years or whatever to pay off the rest of it, this would give the board the authority to do that and act on the organization's behalf.
So,
Which, by the way, I'm all for, because that's awesome.
Oh, no, that's all part of the 5-year plan.
I did want to jump in on that just a second, to talk about the limitations that we have currently with our setup. So basically, a lot of these things that we're outlining, that the board would have the power to do, is currently what we expect the Council of Crowns to do, but the Council of Crowns has no legal authority to actually enact on those things. So our Council of Crowns could get together and say, our membership wants this, we have the money to do it, let's go make it happen. And then when you get to our bylaws in the corpora, the board has no power to make that happen, and the members of the Council of Crowns have no legal authority to sign any paperwork to make that happen. So dreams like that die.
Yeah, pretty much. And then lastly, it says that the board has the power to handle the funds, property, whether real or personal, and to distribute, loan, dispense, or whatever the resource of the organization as the organization sees fit. So it just lets them handle the money. It lets them be responsible for financial parts of the organization. Let's see. So sections 322 and 323 talk about who serves in what positions on the board. And it says that the chief executive officer, i.e. the Northreach Monarch, serves as president. The administrative officer, i.e. the Northreach Prime Minister, serves as the secretary treasurer, and it lists all the duties the secretary treasurer is required to do. So they are required to keep minutes of all the meetings, keep records of all current members, maintain and protect a file of all of our official and legal documents. So when we get our bylaws passed, whatever form they're in, our secretary treasurer will sign those documents as being official, and then we have to keep that original copy on file somewhere, and it's their job to do that. The secretary treasurer will maintain custody of all corporation funds. That means that their name is on all the accounts. They'll keep a full and accurate accounts and receipts and disbursements of all the money, basically all the income and expense that we go through. Make sure that all monies and securities are deposited as appropriate, as designated by the board, and to disperse funds on behalf of the corporation as ordered by the president or board of directors, and then take proper vouchers for such disbursements, and prepare all statements and reports as required by law, such as our biennial report and any other things that we need to file with the IRS. So that person is essentially our admin assistant or admin officer, and they do all of the paperwork and money stuff. That doesn't mean they get to choose to spend money on whatever they want. It just means when the board decides to spend money, they cut the check. And then it says that a regional executive officer, we're down in section C here, will be selected by the board to serve in the position of vice president. So one of the local monarchs, the board will vote on that person to be vice president, and they'll perform any of the president's duties in the president's absence, whether that be through or absence or disability. So if the president is not able to perform their duties for whatever reason, then the vice president can step up and handle a meeting. Because technically, without the president has to call a meeting, and they can't call it to order without the president. So if like the president's in a snow machine accident and is going to be in a coma again, the board wouldn't be able to convene and actually vote on whether or not to remove that person based on their accident, without somebody to head that up. And so this gives the vice president the ability to do that. This is pretty normal in everything from, your school boards all the way up to, that's the way our country works. So, and then a regional executive officer, i.e. local monarch, will also be selected to serve as a board liaison, whatever you say that. And that person is responsible for being the point of contact for anybody that wants to contact the board of directors. So whether that be another kingdom, the police department, the IRS, whatever, that's whose name and phone number and address we will advertise as this is how you contact our board. So, so that is all of the officers of the board. So that means that we have a president, a vice president, a secretary treasurer, and a liaison, and then everybody else is just a regular voting member, and they hang out. Section 324 gives the board the ability to assign additional functions to other members of the board. So if there's something that comes up that isn't covered by one of the other officers, they can do that. And let's see, 325 requires that all of the board meetings be open to the public, and that 10 days notice be given before a meeting is had, and that the 10 days announcement must be made through the corporation's official website. So essentially, we have to have the announcement be on the website or a link to the calendar on the website or something. So a member can just go akmguard.com and they can find out when the board meetings are. Board meetings are allowed to be held in person, telephonically, or through other electronic means as determined by the board. So essentially, the board can decide on whatever meeting format is going to work best for them. So section decides what quorum is, which is the majority of the board members. It allows the board to actually conduct votes through electronic means like the forums or email. And then it says that all of the board business is public and shall be recorded in the minutes and published no later than 4 weeks after the meeting takes place. So the secretary treasurer has to make the minutes public. One of the nice things about today's digital age is we can make those meetings via video that somebody can just watch. So that's gonna be really easy to upload. And then it gives the board the ability to create closed issues that are not open to the public. So just for crazy randomness sake, if a member were to step up and say they were sexually assaulted at Amtgard, that's a pretty sensitive subject. We may not want to make their accusation public knowledge, for fear of, I don't know, victim blaming or all kinds of other things.
They're also covered under whistleblower laws. So
Sure.
we actually have to protect their identity in that case.
There's all kinds of laws that protect people in those situations. And so our board would just vote to recognize it as one of those situations. And then the board, that very specific section of the board meeting would become closed to the public. And then the secretary treasurer still has to maintain notes on that. They're just not open to the public. But a court could subpoena that technically. So we got to keep it all.
And we would be able to have that record in order to give it to them, which would be useful in the future.
And again, this is all super common board of director stuff that's set in both, state and federal law. So we're not recreating any wheels here. And then let's see. Oh, and then we have this one thing in here. This is something I actually really am excited about. So we created a position that is on the board, but is not a voting member. And that position is called the ex officio. And that person is the previous monarch of Northreach. And that person's job is to sit on the board for a year and give all kinds of, like, this is what we did last year kind of information, or this is how we've handled that before. And then they would vote to break ties. Which means that, and that way there's nobody on the board. Like currently right now, in those sorts of situations, the president can wield 2 votes, or you have the monarch that breaks ties. That situation gives one person more power than anybody else on the board. In this situation, we create one person who's just a voice from the previous board who only steps in to vote if there's a deadlock. And that makes so that we never have a deadlock. And it also gives lots of consistency. So if a whole brand new board takes over, there's somebody who knew what happened last month. And so that's really helpful to have. And so I kind of dig that inclusion. And then lastly, this is a pretty good thing to have in there too. Section 3213 requires that when a board member, whenever a monarch steps down from their position, they are required to maintain their position on the board until they have successfully handed over and passed everything on to their successor. So there isn't this blank spot where one person just drops off the face of the earth, someone else jumps into their seat and has no clue what's going on and has none of the resources they need to do their job. So this requires...
That'd be incredibly useful.
Can I interrupt you really quickly?
Yeah.
There was a question in the chat that said, is that ex officio position for the previous monarch optional, or is it mandatory?
So I want to
Go ahead.
chat about that a little bit. I've actually been involved in a previous organization where they enacted the ex officio position. And they did so because it had been demonstrated to them by a related organization how beneficial it was. But it's not enforceable, right? So you, as a person who would be taking that ex officio position, you've already served the term to which you were elected. And in our position, you've already been on the board for a year. You've been the president of the organization for a year. And there's no punishment associated with, like, you can't get kicked out of that position, right? Like, you're not showing up to the meeting, so therefore you're no longer our ex officio. But once this, if this were to be approved, people who stepped into that position as monarch, Northreach monarch, would be doing so with the understanding that it's actually sort of a 2-year commitment. 1 year is the full term, but then you're also willing to stay on to provide for that continuity. But essentially it is voluntary because all of our positions are voluntary, right? So you can relinquish any position at any point in time, and there's no punishment or negative impact to you not performing those duties, except that the board could be placed in a bad situation if there's no way to break those ties.
So, and there's a couple things to look at within the text that exists in the draft right now. There's a couple things that are important. One, the ex officio, their duties are not required, they're entitlements. So the previous Northreach monarch is entitled to attend board meetings and vote to break ties. There's no requirement that they do so, but they do have that authority if they wish to enact it. Depending on how our board decides to run its meetings, this could be totally situational. If they have a meeting where something's absolutely deadlocked, they could always vote to table it until they can bring the ex officio in, and then revisit it the next meeting. They can do that stuff however they want to, but this person's just entitled to those privileges. There's no requirement. There's no requirement they even attend meetings, but if they want to, they get to.
So I have a question as to so the ex officio is the previous year's Northreach monarch. What happens if, because there's a term limit of 2, what about that second term? Is the ex officio the same one from 2 years ago then?
No, it would be, so if I'm the Northreach monarch, once I step down, I become the ex officio. If I've run for Northreach monarch twice, then I still get to be ex officio for a year because that's part of the job. Now, but that does bring up an interesting question. What happens if I run twice during that second term? I would be the previous monarch. And so if you look at the text in the corpora, it only gives these entitlements to the extent that such a person is not an elected director. So in the case where the same person runs twice, or if I step down as Northreach monarch and decide to become Lupin Moon monarch, I'm still on the board. Therefore, there would be no ex officio, and that position just would not exist during that board. And that may happen from time to time, and then the board can just get deadlocked. But this gives us the option to have that be as infrequent as possible. And the board can do the boards can do all kinds of creative things too. Like if there was no ex officio, the board could vote to bring in the previous ex officio, listen to their counsel, and decide as a group to agree with whatever they said to do. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. You just got to vote and put it in the notes.
I think the biggest thing for this position is that it is designed to be a sort of consultant, an advisor. This is the wise sage leading you through the woods. This is, we're a new board. I'm a new monarch. I'm not really sure how to do this. Tell me, your wisdom someone who's just been doing this for the last year and help us to understand the context of any decisions that we might be coming up against. And so in the situations where, if the Northreach monarch resigns and takes on a local position, or even if they don't resign, but just at the end of their term, you still have that continuity. You still have that advice. They're just an actively voting member of the board. But you're still maintaining that continuity of knowledge and experience, which is what the ex officio is designed to provide to the board.
Pyro actually asked a question too. Said he said he likes the new position, and asked what if the person drops off the face of the planet and there's no context. I think we kind of talked about it a little bit. And then Deli asked the question, says, does that break the one position rule if the previous monarch is both the ex officio and whatever new position? And I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. That person would not have their normal vote and then also the tie-breaking vote. You can't have both things. My question... Sorry, go ahead.
I say section 3212 or 3213 says that you don't get to be ex officio if you're an active board member.
My question would be is there a method by which, looking back, at various local monarch positions, it seems like it's, I don't want to say it's not common, but it's not uncommon for people to just get burned out, after their thing, be like, I'm done, I'm taking a break, I don't want to deal with any of this. So is there a method by which, the board or by all thing or something that we could bring someone that was not necessarily maybe the previous some other person, if there was a totally brand new board, you know what I mean? Is there a way that we could
could have the ex officio maybe
or something? I mean, just any kind of fallback, because I said, I don't want to say it's common, but it's not uncommon either for people to just be like, I'm out.
I think that a situation like that would be both rare and unique enough that the board themselves could decide how to handle that. And the example I gave a couple minutes ago is a good way that they could do that. But it might require some creativity, and they could bring on any member of the previous board to act as a consultant, but the bylaws wouldn't guarantee that person a vote. The board would have to take a vote to say, we're going to do whatever our consultant says is in our best interest. That person could be a previous board member. That person could be a lawyer, depending on the situation that they need. So they can bring somebody in and say, look, we're going to defer to this person's expertise. Everybody raise your hand that you want to do that. Once the board has decided that's what they're going to do, and this person says, here's my advice. Well, the board's already agreed to do that. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways that can be handled, and I think that they're probably more situational, and the board just needs to figure out how to handle it.
So there was one thing that was interesting that actually, as I've reviewed these documents several times, sort of ad nauseum over the last few months, hadn't really occurred to me, and I don't think I've heard conversation about this, so I'd like to bring it up. So in this section, we state that, where is it? A regional executive officer will be elected to serve in the position of vice president. So typically, when we think of vice president, we think of someone who will become the president if the president's seat is vacated, and then will remain the president. But in this case, it would be different. They would step into the president position until a president would be elected by the people. So there isn't a provision here where you can, appoint a local monarch to then just become the new Northreach monarch. They would only enact that position until a duly elected president could be seated. So that's a little bit of a different concept for, in most boards, it's just you step from vice president to president and then you stay in that position. So this would be a little bit different. And I'm wondering if we have that clearly outlined, because now that I've thought about that situation, I'm not sure that we have that clearly defined in the bylaws.
Let me just hop backwards really quickly because it occurs to me I don't know. Deli's question could have been two things. So, if the person that is the ex officio member of the board is also holding like a regional position, like they're the local champion or something like that, does that violate the rule? They can still do that, right?
It does not, because
Okay.
they're not an officer of the board.
Okay.
So, is there any additional discussion on, what are we on, Article 3? Scroll back up. Yeah, on Article 3, officers and directors. I think from what we've just discussed, we've covered the questions that I've seen on the forums or heard in passing. We got some additional good questions and clarification here, so that was really good feedback. So then, it is 8:56, and I'm going to make the executive decision that we don't jump into Section 4 officers in the admin manual, because there's some topics in that I know we'll want to have some hearty discussion on, and we will not be able to accomplish that in 4 minutes. One of the biggest things we've had a lot of discussion about already on the forums and on Facebook is the very first section of Section 4, which is oath of office. And 3 minutes isn't going to be enough to cover that. So I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their Sunday evening once again to go over all this really important documentation and make sure we've got the concepts really clearly understood. I want to thank everybody who's continued to contribute questions and to gather feedback and to bring it to this panel. It's incredibly beneficial and rewarding is not the right word. Important, impactful, other I words.
Influential.
Influential, there we go. But ultimately what it leads to is when we have open dialogue and we have these types of discussions, we make our documents better to reflect more of what our membership is looking for. And I may be a little bit of a broken record because I think I thank everybody at the end of every session, but it really is that important, and I believe in this process that we're following wholeheartedly. So thank you. And have a great Sunday evening. And if you have further questions, please post them on the forums or on Facebook, and let's continue to discuss these very important changes. Have a great evening.